And welcome back now to Face the Nation. Here with our panel, Kimberly Strassel is a columnist for the Wall Street Journal. Jeffrey Goldberg writes for The Atlantic. Jan Crawford is our chief legal correspondent. We'd also like to welcome Sherilyn Eiffel to Face the Nation. She is the president and director counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund. And last but not least, the White House correspondent for the New York Times, Peter Baker. I want to talk a little bit about civil rights and where we are on that. And I would just start by asking the panel. You saw the Edmund Pettus Bridge. It's become kind of an icon in its own way in the whole civil rights movement. Does anybody here know who Edmund Pettus is?
Yes, he was a senator, he was a Confederate general, and he later led the Ku Klux Klan in Alabama.
He was the Grand Dragon
Yes, he was.
of the Ku Klux Klan in Alabama. Some of the things you don't know until you go to the site. I had no idea.
Is it marked? Does it say that?
Well, that's his name right across.
No,
the
but
top.
does it acknowledge anywhere that
It just says Edmund Pettus, but it's one of those things that's up there, and down through the years, I think people have just forgotten. And
Well, everybody there knows.
that's what you find out, which shows why you ought to go to where something
Yes,
is happening
yes.
as a journalist to find out. Where are we right now? Jan, you of course are a native of Alabama. Is Alabama
grew up
different than
there
it used to be?
Oh, completely. And I thought, as Congressman Lewis said in your interview, we can't lose sight of the fact of how much has changed. Because that does a disservice when you think about how much people before us sacrificed for that change. But yet, as we've seen on a number of civil rights issues, whether it's race, same-sex marriage, there still is a long way to go. But you also see in Alabama, and I've been down a couple times in the last week, for example, with the same-sex marriage controversy, you see great hope. You see people looking to advance change in the state of Alabama, as you see across the nation. So while we had people sacrificing 50 years ago, I think we still have that today, not only in Alabama, but across the country.
Well, while Edmund Pettus's name is still on that bridge, Judge Ballard, who's the probate judge in that courthouse, he got up Saturday morning and went and opened up the courthouse for us so we could conduct that interview. And as it often is in the South, made coffee for everybody. And when we came over there to do that interview, as you saw with John Lewis, he came out on the front steps and said, "Welcome. We're glad to have you."
But it's just incredible to think that there are people alive today, our parents or say our grandparents, who couldn't drink out of the same water fountains.
Yeah.
That is still, that wasn't that long ago.
Well, that's the
when you think
challenge
about
for
it.
us, is to be able to keep in our head the two things, that we've made extraordinary progress,
But
we have a really long way to go. And you really said it, Bob, in the setup for this, when you said that these people walked across the bridge and they changed America for the better. And I think that's what we have to understand. When we see these protests happening today about police violence against unarmed African Americans, it's going to make this country better. We're at a moment where change does have to happen. When you hear the FBI director, as he did this week, talking about implicit bias and talking about the way in which law enforcement does have bias that has to be dealt with, and there has to be training. We're at a moment where we have the opportunity to make real change, and that's what civil rights does. It makes America better, and we can't be afraid of the moment. I think John Lewis said it best, we got to face it.
But also the nature of the problems have changed. I mean, the Comey speech, it got so much attention because it was an FBI director saying police officers have bias. What was more interesting in that speech to me was him talking about why it is. He said, we cannot reduce this to a debate about policing tactics. We have to talk about why we have bias. And that gets back to the fact that problems have changed. We have a social and cultural issue in a lot of African American communities across the country about violent crime. And that was part of his speech, saying, how do we address those root causes? Because this is part of the problem that people looking at each other is, how do you actually deal with that?
What was fascinating, and what's been fascinating to me, is how long this issue of police violence has kind of been really at the center of concern in African American communities, and how it's now kind of surfaced over the last year and kind of everyone's engaging it. What was interesting about Comey's remarks is it's the one thing that was omitted And that's so important if you talk to young people in communities all over. And it's about this issue of accountability. We still haven't heard any prominent law enforcement official saying, we understand the need for training, we understand there has to be supervision. And when something goes wrong, when a life is taken, an innocent life is taken, there has to be accountability. And I've talked to people, all over this country. That's what they're waiting to hear. That means the sea
wasn't that
change.
what Comey was saying, though? I mean, I thought this speech, which made the front page of most newspapers, I thought it maybe didn't get as much attention as it should have. I mean, I think it's going to be remembered as a remarkable speech in the history of this country.
You know, it's fascinating. If you look back at FBI history, you got to place this in context. The day after the I Have a Dream speech, Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, the top aide to J. Edgar Hoover wrote him a memo. William Sullivan wrote Hoover a memo saying that we must target Martin Luther King as we must mark him as the most dangerous Negro of the future. I mean, that was the language that they used. So it's an incredible leap forward for the FBI, and I'd rather be uncharacteristically positive about this in the sense that I'm a journalist, so it's I look for the negative, obviously. But the fact that this was an FBI director talking about inherent bias or racial bias that is unconscious is quite a remarkable achievement. I think you're right. I think it will be. On the other hand, just a very quick point on your Edmund Pettus point, it is remarkable that we're having a debate in this city about the name of the Washington football team. But when you go to the South and you find that on bridges and highways you have the names still of Grand Dragons of the Ku Klux Klan. That's a remarkable thing. I find that remarkable.
But Lewis has been asked if should we change the name of that bridge, because of, and he has suggested no, that it's important that people remember.
Well,
and,
I think in fact it's actually the point that was made earlier, that what would be great is to have the plaque that says who Edmund Pettus really was, so people can get the full context. I mean, I think that's part of, like, the history of this country needs to be kind of explained in a way. There are all these places where we have these encounters. You saw the New York Times do this big story about lynching, where these things happen. We need these kind of notices so we understand what happened in that space.
Peter.
The other thing I think it's important to remember, though, is, and because we are negative as journalists, Comey's speech was important and landmark and said a lot of interesting things, but go beyond the speech. Where is the FBI today in terms of its own diversity? Our colleague, our friend Josh Gerstein wrote a piece pointing out that it's still under 5% of the FBI is African American at this point in
which is the same percentage as the Ferguson Police Department.
Yeah, in the year 2015. I think part of it is we have a president who's African American. We think, okay, therefore diversity is more or less taken care of because we got it at the top. That doesn't actually mean that throughout the various layers of government, various layers of authorities, that has in fact taken hold. In fact, President Obama is going to be going to Selma, I think, in a few weeks to bring up this issue, which is interesting for him because it's a topic where he's had some interesting back and forth on how out front to be on.
It's a catch-22 on diversity and policing, because I think the Gerstein piece even suggested that, and I think Comey has said, the FBI has a hard time attracting young African Americans to want to be in the FBI, and the Ferguson Police Department has a little difficulty attracting African Americans to want to be police officers. So that's part of why changing and transforming who law enforcement really is in African American communities is going to be important if you want to move that diversity.
Let me ask you about this this awful thing that happened down in Chapel Hill, where you had the 3 Muslim students who were shot execution style by this guy. They're saying they're going to investigate it as a hate crime. I think it's more of a nut crime myself, if I could put it in those kind of terms. But what's the take here at this table?
We just don't know enough yet. I mean, this guy was a focus of the community, the killer. They'd had meetings about him. He was angry all the time. He was yelling at people, not just about parking spots, but about music and noise. There might have been a mental health issue there, too. I think it was unfortunate a little bit that the president came out and instantly suggested that this had, in fact, been done because of religion.
Without prejudging the facts of the case, I think he was angry at everyone in the community, but somehow it was 2 Muslim women in hijab and a Muslim man who got the brunt of it. I'm not, I'm not speculating, or I'm not trying not to speculate about it, but clearly it's worthy of investigation.
But here's another part of it. What business did he have being out there with a gun? I mean, if he'd gone out there with a baseball bat, he might have hit one of them in the head, and
I'd rather
somebody
he
might
not
have
be
been
armed
hurt.
at all.
But with guns like they are today, you just you know, and you've killed 6 or 7 people.
I mean, we should be cautious. The Justice Department actually isn't investigating it as a hate crime. They're investigating the predicate of the killing to determine whether there should be a hate crimes investigation. So they're taking the slow steps of figuring this out. And I think, you know, Jeff is right. At the end of the day, there are 3 Muslims killed. I heard a Muslim young person say, you know, our parents now feel they have to have the talk with us that African American parents have with their children. That even if it evokes that feeling, it's a very serious moment. And so I think we'll see as the Justice Department goes through this investigation what really happened here. But I think there's enough there that we should be deeply concerned about the implications of this killing.
You know, and there was also in Alabama in the last week, an Indian grandfather visiting his son who was studying in Huntsville was beaten, thrown down, and now is hospitalized. But of course, law enforcement there fired the officer. It was videotaped. So obviously, these are affects people that across the board.
All right, we're going to take a little break and come back and talk about some of the other issues of the day in 1 minute. Well, we're back now with our panel. Well, this is kind of turning out to be the Alabama edition of Face the Nation, because the next story we have here is the controversy going on down in Alabama about gay marriage. Jan, bring us up to speed.
Well, you know, a federal judge in Mobile struck down the state's ban on same-sex marriage. Like other judges across the country have done, the federal appeals court based in Atlanta refused to intervene. The Supreme Court refused to intervene and put her ruling on hold. So judges across the state were to begin issuing licenses to same-sex couples on Monday. But then late Sunday night, a week ago today, the Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, Roy Moore, wrote a letter to the 67 probate judges saying, don't do this. You have to follow the state law, which says marriage is between a man and a woman, and do not listen to this federal judge. So it created a situation in Alabama where you had this patchwork. Some judges started issuing licenses, some refused. There was some clarification toward the end of the week. So now most of the counties, including the populated counties, the big centers like Birmingham, Huntsville, Mobile, Montgomery, they're issuing marriage licenses now about 3/4 of the state. But you have this Chief Justice of the Supreme Court who has said we don't have to follow a federal judge. So it's harkened back to the days we started this program off, you know, with George Wallace defying a court order, standing in the schoolhouse door at the University of Alabama. So I think it does show that, you know, demagogues are alive and well in the great state of Alabama.
In Dallas County, where I was yesterday, Judge Ballard told me that what he is doing right now, he is issuing the licenses, but he has discontinued performing any marriage ceremonies.
And that is what most judges are doing. That is what most judges are doing. Of course, the Supreme Court is going to resolve this issue. They're hearing arguments.
Maybe.
Well,
I think that, right, in April, with decision in June. And Justice Thomas, in the court's decision, refusing to get involved on Monday, they had an order refusing to get involved, kind of said the court has signaled that it is not going to allow these bans to stand. But it has created just a controversy.
It's hard to see how they could reverse that.
I agree.
Coming next year, having allowed so many states at this point to
I agree.
start.
Alabama is the 37th state. I think it would be very difficult.
What do you think about how the court has handled this?
We could hope that they would resolve it, but they haven't up until now. And in fact, I would argue everything that's happening in Alabama is precisely because the Supreme Court has just completely punted on this issue. You go back to 2013, they had 2 cases sent to them. The straight out one that would have decided this question of states' rights and gay marriage, they said that the people didn't have standing and they refused to rule on the merits. And then they issued this equally confusing case that had to do with the Defense of Marriage Act, the federal law, that just was all over the place in terms of legal arguments. And it's allowed all of these federal courts to make their own decisions about whether or not states have the right to do these bans or not. And it has led to mass confusion. So now they're going to hear cases from 4 states in April, and hopefully we'll make a decision in June. But there's a lot of people watching this thinking they're going to try and split the baby yet again on this.
No way. I think they got what they wanted. I think last year what the Supreme Court wanted to, or 2 years ago, to be clear about, is they didn't want to get out ahead of the country. They wanted some things to happen in the states to kind of figure out where things would wind up. And some things have happened in the states. And so we've now got, as you said, 37 states. where marriage equality has moved forward. And so in a way, it's kind of set the stage for the Supreme Court, at least probably a bare majority of the Supreme Court, to not look like they're getting out ahead of the country, to kind of move into this issue in a way that puts them squarely in the center of it. You heard
Slow
Justice,
motion legal ruling over 2 years.
in a way.
effect,
I mean, you
correct.
heard Justice Ginsburg saying, you know, I think the country is ready for marriage equality. So in a way, it's not been pretty, and you're right, it has left, you know, people like this judge kind of, you know, sitting there with this ruling. And as I understand it, there's also an Alabama Supreme Court action that's going forward at the same time. So it has created confusion. But in terms of what the Supreme Court seemed to want 2 years ago, I think this is what they wanted. I think they wanted this stage to be set.
I find it very difficult to imagine that Justice Kennedy, Anthony Kennedy, he's kind of been the key architect of these decisions over the last 15 years, is going to reverse course now. I mean, he sees that as his legacy.
I think he's very ambivalent on this, though, which was part of that Windsor decision on DOMA, that he didn't actually want to take a position. And so, I mean, I think it's very possible that you get a situation where, for instance, the court maybe rules that this is a states' rights issue, but that other states have to recognize each other's marriages. I think you could get a mixed ruling on this.
Jeffrey and Peter, let's talk a little bit about this resolution that the president sends up to the Congress, looking for a unified front
Clarity
on
all
the
over
fight
again.
on terror.
Tremendous levels of clarity.
Like the Supreme Court 2 years ago.
Am I wrong? Yeah. Am I wrong in thinking this whole thing might just blow up in his face and leave us looking more ununified than ever on what to do
he
about
set
this?
up a very interesting resolution. Now, very few presidents have ever proposed to restrain their own power, but he set up a resolution that says, you, the Congress, will give me the power to do what I'm already doing and have done for 6 months, but there'll be a 3-year time limit, and then we will rule out what he calls enduring ground combat operations. Now, in some ways, that is a restriction. No president, Lyndon Johnson didn't send up a Gulf of Tonkin resolution with the 3-year time limit. Having said that, he was leaving in place a 2001 authorization for force that still allows him to do pretty much anything, or his successor, what he wants to do. So Congress is kind of in the middle. Democrats saying, wait, this is way too permissive. You can still do anything you want. Republicans saying, wait, this is way too, restrained. You're not really fighting this war. And you don't have a consensus at this point.
You have this very bizarre situation in which you have some Republicans who complain, as a matter of course, that the president should seek their approval for taking military action, complaining that the president isn't seeking enough approval for enough military action. And you also have a situation in which this is akin in a way to the administration asking Congress to give it the power to collect taxes. It's collecting taxes. It already does. And so the administration wants kind of a theoretical debate in Congress in real time. We're already fighting ISIS on multiple fronts, and you have this bizarre, really bizarre debate on something that's already happening as if it's not happening.
I don't think it's theoretical what the administration wants. I think what they want is to be able to say they have partners, is to not be kind of hanging out there by themselves.
Political cover.
I don't think it's just political cover. I think it's exactly what you described. You're getting it from every side. People say, you haven't asked us, and so now we're asking. That's what you said you wanted. Yeah, we're doing it, but we're saying it's going to be limited. People don't want us out there forever. I think it's a way of, even if it doesn't show unity, it's a way of kind of spreading this around.
The president could conceivably come out of this saying, look, I'm the executive. I'm dealing with this problem while these people in Congress are arguing among themselves about these fine points of principle. So he could come out looking rather decisive, I think.
Here's the part that bothers me, and I will preface this by saying I certainly do not want to see the President of the United States put on a military uniform. No President of the United States has ever put on a military uniform, and there's a reason for that, and we all want to keep it that way as far as I know. But after that Jordanian pilot was killed in that horrible way, here you saw the king put on his fatigues. He executes 2 prisoners that they were holding in Jordan and launched bombing raids. We have another American hostage killed. And Congress and the president goes off to California to do a fundraiser and some other stuff, and the Congress goes on vacation, and they say, yeah, we'll debate what to do about all this, but we're going to do it as long as it fits into the schedule. There's no reason to do anything out of the ordinary.
Look, I think
previous.
Oh no.
I'm sure I'm overstating
No,
this,
just a
but
little.
No.
Well, the King of Jordan is the leader of a country named after his family, so
Yeah.
it's a little bit of a
want that
different
on the
situation. Yeah.
Previous presidents have sent up authorization of force in the weeks before they intended to use it. I mean, what's happening here is sort of a theoretical, political. It's important, but it's not going to change what's happening on the ground. The president's already made clear whether they pass it or not, he's going to continue doing the exact same thing.
This is political cover, though. I mean, it reminds me of the Syria thing of a few years ago. The president said, "Don't cross my red line," and then Bashar Assad did, and then the president said, "Okay, you Congress, tell me if I can do anything about it," because he didn't want to act on his own. He wanted them to have to take responsibility as well for what happened. And, you know, the Republicans, if they wanted to be smart here, what they ought to do is just call his bluff and not take this up at all. I mean, he's already operating under a authorization that he claims gives him all the authority.
But that would
he
make them
needs
look.
to
That
be
would make them
doing.
look a little bit
Right.
feckless.
So-
that makes them look totally feckless.
So
like, I'm
that's
not
why,
going to engage
yeah.
in that.
So that's
still
why
gets
they
political
are
cover.
taking it up. That's why they are taking it up. Except for I think what their goal is going to be in the end is to use it as a debate to try to force the president to actually elucidate a strategy.
But
what is
what
a strategy?
does this do to how we're perceived outside of the
I'm not
United
sure
States?
that we can that this is going to affect how we're perceived in the sense that we are who we are. We are a nation that has the rule of law. I think that there are a lot of people who perceive us badly for not following the rule of law in previous engagements. So to the extent that there is a debate and a discussion will be revealed. And I think that that's not going to affect our view outside the country. What it is going to do is going to force us in the country to call the question that you've been asking. These terrible things are happening. Do we want to do this or do we not want to do this?
Something we always forget because we're sitting here is that in the greater Middle East, people understand what Obama is doing. He's killing terrorists in 8 or 10 different locations right now as we speak, and we often sort of lose sight of that fact, in part because of the way he's so hesitant to talk about it in grand terms, and because of these debates in Congress. But he's been killing terrorists for years now, and he's doing it whether or not Congress lets him do it.
He's been criticized for it because of the drone strikes and so forth. So even when he does it, he gets criticized for it. So I think that's part of the reason.
What's interesting,
for this.
what this is less about a legal restriction on the president than a political statement of intent. This is how I perceive this war to be. It will be restrained, it will not be on the ground, and he's trying to set the parameters in effect for his successor, right? A 3-year time limit, which the next president could ignore. But a 3-year time limit means that the next president is going to have to at least address the question 1 year in or to his or her presidency, and that's an interesting.
All right, we have to wrap her up right there. Thank you all. This was a lot of very interesting for me, and I hope it was for others. I'm sure it was. And we'll be back to talk a little bit about CBS newsman Bob Stein. In a news organization like ours, you get to know some of your colleagues well and others not at all. You're in one place, they're in another. So for me, that's how it was with Bob Simon, who died last week. He came to work here in 1967, 2 years before I did, but we never really worked together until 1982 when we covered the Falklands War together in Argentina. It was there I really came to appreciate just how good he was. In a medium where we tell the story so much of the time with pictures, he knew how to make the pictures more meaningful with words. There's an old saying that one picture is worth 1,000 words, but I always thought that depended on the words. Bob always chose the right words, and he was never afraid to go where the news was to find them. That's what the good ones do, and he was a good one. Bob's final 60 Minutes piece airs tonight on CBS. Well, that's it for us today. We'll see you right here next Sunday on Face the Nation.